First, 2024 release that I did not love. This honestly felt so long and so convoluted and messy. Hello friends and welcome to 2025. I am so excited for this year because I have so many wonderful ideas related to book content, cozy content, and baking content. And I'm just so excited to spend this year with you guys and coming up with new ideas, new things to experience, but also really kind of embracing some of the old cozy things we used to do and have done in the past, which is kind of a good segue to what this video is about. 2024 was a really great reading year for me, and I mentioned that in one of my previous videos. So today is going to be more about the books of 2024. I wanted to talk about my 12 books of 2024, which was one of my new challenges for myself. I wanted to read 12 new books that were being published in 2024. These would be new genres, new ideas, new kind of everything, except for some of the authors I have read before. But for the most part, everything was new, and this was going to be a really good encouragement, but also challenge, because it was making me pick up some books that maybe I wouldn't have normally picked up. Spoiler alert, I bought 11 out of the 12 because one of them I couldn't get here in Germany. No matter where I looked, I just couldn't find it. And the few times I did look online, it was like, oh, I could get it in June of 2025. So no matter what, I just could not get one of these books, which was called Splinters by Leslie Jamison. So that book, I just didn't get to. And there were 3 other books that I didn't read before the end of 2024. I'm not upset with myself because this was just kind of a really big encouragement for myself. I've also purchased these books and they're still very interesting, so I'm still going to talk about them because I think they're actually really fascinating and books that I would love to read. I just hadn't had the time to pick them up yet. So I wouldn't be surprised if I read them in the next couple months. And then I read 8 others. I was really happy with all the books I picked up, except for maybe one of them. I could have probably lived without reading one of them. But I thought this video would be really fun just to kind of talk about the 12 books of 2024, what I read, what I liked, and what I didn't like, and what I didn't read. So, you already know one, Splinters by Leslie Jamison. I didn't get to. I want to still read it, but it just didn't get on my reading list. There are 3 others, like I had mentioned, that I did not read. The 3 here, but I thought I would talk about them real fast so you can still get an idea of some of the books I picked up. The first one is Martyr by Kaveh Akbar. This one's supposed to be really fascinating and kind of jumping into the idea of despair, grief, pain, and pain. So we follow a character who is a poet and he's trying to kind of figure out his life. There's a lot of mystery behind his parents and kind of behind his past. He deals a lot with trying to figure out who he is as a person and then where that's going. I don't know much about this one because I was trying to keep them a little bit more of a surprise before I read them. But from my understanding, this book was really well liked by a lot of YouTubers, and it was just well liked behind the scenes as well in the literary world. So I am still looking forward to reading this one. It is about grief, so it is a little bit heavier. It's about pain, like I mentioned. So it's one of those books where I have to pick up when I know I'm going to be in the right mood. And unfortunately, last year, I just picked up some other ones that were a bit heavier before I picked up this one, and that's why this one didn't get read. It just happened to not be in front of me every time I was ready for a big, heavy book. Not heavy in weight, because it's actually not that long, but heavy in feelings. The next one is The Morningside by Tay Albright. This sounds so fascinating, and it sounds magical and beautiful, and we're ended up following a young girl who moves into this house, or this, not house, because it's a town. It's like an apartment complex. And she's learning about the ghosts or not. I don't actually know if I should put quotes or not because I don't know if the ghosts are real or not. But she is a young girl who's just kind of exploring this new world of hers, but she's also exploring the past world because she doesn't know a lot about her past life and where she came from. And she's learning about this home that she came from her aunt and from other people. And it just seems a bit of a mystery. And there's one line on the back that always catches me, and this is one of the reasons why I bought this book in the past. And it says, when she encounters this mysterious inhabitant of the building's penthouse, Bessie Duras, and the 3 massive dogs that may or may not be humans in disguise. And I thought to myself, what? So exactly. And then there's another part that it's like the truth about her own haunted past. I'm guessing that there is no ghosts. But the fact that there's dogs that could be disguised as human, or humans disguised as dogs, ghosts could be there too. So still looking forward to reading this one. I'm going to pick it up. I just haven't yet. And then we have This Strange Eventful History by Claire Moussad. This is connected to World War II. It's another very heavy book. It's supposed to be very beautifully written. I am looking forward to reading this one, but in past years I read a lot of books that took place and were inspired by World War II. So I had taken a bit of a break, and I think there was just not a moment for me to be able to get into that idea yet, but I feel another historical fiction interest coming along. So I don't think this one's going to be left to the side for very long. I'm still looking forward to reading this one. It is about a man who ends up having to leave his wife, not leave her, but ended up having to go to war. And we follow this kind of journey between him and his wife and the struggles and what ends up happening all around. They do mention a couple other countries, which I'm quite curious as to what ends up going to happen, which I do know. World War II, you had multiple different countries kind of connected to the war, of course, but the story follows this man and woman, so I'm curious as to how the other countries get related to their story as well. So this one was just maybe a too heavy of a book, which is funny because some of the books I read this year were very, very, very heavy. But I'm looking forward to reading this. I just didn't get a chance to. So out of the 12 books, there are 4 that I didn't read. 1, of course, that I didn't get. 3 that I just didn't get to. And I'm still looking forward to reading all 4 of them. I just didn't have the time, and that's completely okay. This was just a goal of mine. It was an encouragement and a way to pick up some new books that maybe I wouldn't have actually picked up normally. Which leads me to the other 8 books. I don't want to make this video too long, so I'm going to go ahead and talk about these books kind of quickly. However, if you want to discuss them more, just let me know, because I have lots of thoughts on all of these books. Like The Women by Kristin Hannah. I did a full video on my thoughts on this book. So if you're curious, the video will be down in the description below. And I really love this book. It was a 5-star book for me. We follow the nurses who were in the Vietnam War. We follow their journey there, their difficulty of being there, but more what their lives were like when they came back. And this is, like I had mentioned, I read a lot of heavy books, and this was a heavy one. This one made me cry a ton. But I thought it was also very inspirational and very eye-opening in the sense of what women went through in the past, what they went through during the wars, because it's not just all about women being at home and playing house. Women struggled a lot as well, and I'm not saying men didn't struggle during this time, but unfortunately a lot of people struggled all over the place. And so we follow one specific woman named Frankie, and we follow her journey through going through the nursing program, going to Vietnam as a nurse, learning how to be a nurse there, coming back, and then trying to figure out what her life is, what her life meaning is, and how she comes back into this world where people don't believe she was a nurse and fought in Vietnam. Didn't fight necessarily, but she was there. So this is a very breathtaking book, very heavy, very beautiful. I highly recommend it, especially if you like reading historical fictions. This one's one of my favorites. Kristin Hannah is also a fabulous writer. She's very descriptive, and the way she creates conversations between her characters just feels very real as well, which I really appreciate. So 5-star book for me. I really enjoyed it. I really got pulled into this one. I read it so quickly, and I have read this author before, so I probably would have picked up this book anyways, but I'm happy I picked it up sooner rather than later. The next book I Actually, I don't know what order I read these in, so I'm just going to talk about them as they come up, which the next one is Wandering Stars by Tommy Orange. Some of you may know, and some of you may not know. Also, hey, if you're new here, hello, my name's Melissa, and I'm happy you're here. And if you're not new here, welcome back. Happy New Year. I hope it was good. I also hope your new year was good if you're new here. Okay, let's get back to what we were talking about. So, some of you may know, some of you may not know, I actually am partially Native American. I am connected to some tribes back in the US. I am still trying to be part of the tribes. I'm starting to participate in the tribes. My family kind of moved away from the tribes when I was younger, and now we're going, not we, but me and my siblings are trying to participate more and become more part of the tribes that we were part of when we were younger. So, picking up this one, I was really interested because Tommy Orange follows a generational jump through in time following this Native American family, and we end up kind of jumping through time. We start actually back in around 1864 during the Sand Creek Massacre. We talk about the pain and suffering a lot of Native families went through, a lot of Indian families went through, and then also specifically about a man and his struggle through time and life. We don't follow him specifically because we actually jump through time and how the family changed and what changed in their lives throughout time, especially as the Europeans continued to colonize the US. We ended up seeing how it was affecting their traditions, especially when the traditions were being taken away and they were being forced to kind of adapt into the Western civilization. So when I talk about like rejoining my tribe and learning our traditions, unfortunately, a lot of traditions have been lost over time because unfortunately, when the US was colonized and natives, they were told that they no longer could practice a lot of the things that they practiced. You need to be westernized. So this story is a lot about the pain and suffering a lot of people went through and a lot of Native families went through. And it was quite eye-opening, especially being somebody who wants to kind of reintegrate myself into my tribes. This one was heavy and eye-opening in the fact of what ended up happening probably to my past family. And that's something that I find is also very shocking. It's something that we didn't really follow, and it's hard to track, and it's hard to go backwards in time to understand where my great-grandfather was, or my great-great-grandfather, or my great-great-great-grandmother. And so it's quite intriguing and interesting seeing it, time actually being unfolded in this family, and you can see that there are chunks missing and there are pieces missing and there's no full story, because how do you track information when families are being torn apart or being sent there and being told to forget your name and become John Smith? Like, it's unfortunate, but back when all this was happening, it was true, and it's painful, and it's unfortunate that this is something that actually did happen. No, the story is not 100% fictional, but Tommy Orange did do a really great job, I believe, in following in what could have happened through a family's generational changes and what could have happened to the families themselves and the children and what it looks like today, especially when you're looking at gun violence and also drug and alcohol usage. So this is a very heavy book. I absolutely loved it. It's a 5-star read for me. And I am definitely looking forward to reading other books by Tommy Orange. I do know he has a book called They're There. I have not read it yet, but I am picking it up because this was so fascinating, so heartbreaking, so eye-opening, and really, really well done. And if you are interested in this type of story, I highly recommend picking this book up. I think I was concerned about reading it, but also so happy I did read it. And there's actually one more thing I want to talk about before we move on. At the beginning of this book, there is a family tree, and I love the fact that Tommy Orange decided to add a family tree in here because it really kind of organizes how everything was set up and how everybody's connected and how time shifts between these characters as well. So that was extremely helpful. I highly recommend this. I loved it, and I am definitely going to reread it, but I'm looking forward to reading anything else by Tommy Orange as well. The next book I'm going to talk about is Grief is for People by Sloane Crosley. This was also a very lovely book. I ended up giving it a 4-star. I have gone through grief just like many other people. I ended up losing my father 10 years ago, even though losing does feel like it just happened. I still cry about him all the time, and that's completely okay. And that's kind of what this book just reiterated for me. I definitely had a hard time when my dad passed, and I questioned why I wasn't ever feeling better, especially after 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, and why I still felt so much grief. And one of the things that I really, really loved in this book that Sloane Crosley talks about is that grief is like a vase, and you hold this vase and you're trying to find this vase a home, and wherever you put it, it just doesn't feel right. And sometimes people say, hey, just put the vase over there. So you do, and you put it down for just a little while, but you end up picking it up because it still doesn't feel right over there. And so you just continuously carry around this vase. And that's truly how it feels. And I felt so understood when I read that, because one of the things I always tell people how I feel, and really if they lose somebody, how one of the ways I like to talk to people about that grief is, unfortunately, that grief never goes away. We just kind of grow around that grief, and it's still there. That loss is still there. That pain is still there, but we continue to grow, and it just sits there. And we have these ebbs and flows of really great days. Some days I am so good, it's like I'm perfectly fine. And other days I can start crying in an instant because I have a memory of my dad that just really just makes me feel sad, and it's completely okay. And so we continue to grow, we continue to move forward, but that pain, that grief, that sadness just sits there, and that's okay. And so when I read this book, I thought, wow, I feel understood, I feel connected, I feel like I don't have to try to explain myself all the time. When I cry and somebody says, oh, what's going on? I say, oh, I'm thinking about my dad. And they say, when did he pass? I'm like, oh, 10 years ago. And they're like, oh, 10 years. And it's like, yeah, 10 years. That's still not very long ago. And I was also quite young when he passed. I was 21 when he passed, and it can still be very difficult. So if you've ever gone through grief, if you're going through grief, if you feel grief, if you have this pain inside you, just know that many other people understand you. And there's no reason to try to shove it away. There's no reason to try to get rid of it. It's gonna be there, and that's okay. So Grief is for People was really lovely. I gave it a 4-star, like I said. There was one thing that I was just like, and that was COVID talk. This was at the beginning of the year. I read this book, I think. No, I read it in May. But I think COVID, like, we just got kind of oversaturated with all of the media and jokes and everything, that when I ended up getting to that chapter or that section, I was just like, I really don't want to read about this. So unfortunately, I think that did bring it down a little bit for me. But I gave it a 4.2 to 4.5. So it's just a little bit. But I still really loved it. I felt connected. I encourage you to read it if you have gone through grief. And even if you haven't, I think it's just a really great book to make you understand and feel connected to others. So very, very delightful. It's also a very short book, so it's a very easy read and truly beautiful. The next book I'm going to talk about is Knife by Salman Rushdie. Rushdie. I never know how to pronounce his last name. So Knife was another book I was questioning if I was going to like, and I loved it. I also gave it 4 stars. So This one was actually a 4-star. So this one is a nonfiction. This is actually a story by Salman Rushdie of something that actually truly happened to him. And it follows the story of his early career, but then there's this moment where he ends up getting stabbed on stage in front of a crowd, and it's shocking. And he didn't just get like stabbed once, he got stabbed multiple times. And it ends up affecting his life dramatically. And we follow his recovery, we follow his pain, his suffering, but we also follow this encouragement he has in the background and his need and his want to become better. So this one was truly breathtaking. I was shocked with how much I liked it. Like I said, I was questioning if I was going to enjoy it, and I really did. I even marked a few passages where I thought, wow, this is beautiful. I would definitely reread this again. For example, there is one passage I marked that says, "It became clear to me that this was not just a relationship of equals. Rather, it was one in which I was by some distance the less equal part. Even better than that, it was a relationship not of competitiveness, but of total mutual support, happiness." That's taken out of context, but if you read this book, you'll understand why that section was so moving. And I have a couple other areas that are marked in here. But this Salman Rushdie almost died. He was struggling, and it's a story of him coming out of the struggle and finding more to life and not letting this fear and pain and anger take over his life. So I highly recommend you pick this one up as well. I think it was breathtaking. I thought it was really just one of those novels where you're going to be shocked with how much you enjoy it. It's also another short one, so it's a really quick read and really just fascinating, especially over the fact that this is a true story of somebody who was being attempted of being killed. I'm trying to say this where it doesn't get all weird on YouTube. But the fact that this was attempted but not successful and still a positive story was really, really great. Okay, I'm going to make a weird transition, and that's Until August by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I've read one other book by Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and that was Love and Other Demons. Love and Other Demons was a very weird book. If you've read anything by this author, he also wrote 100 Years of Solitude. I have not read that one. I do want to read it, but this one was very intriguing, especially after reading Love and Other Demons, because Love and Other Demons was very complicated. It was very convoluted. You have this young girl who gets bitten by a dog and has rabies, is maybe going to die, and then falls in love with a priest, I believe, and it ends up just being a very complicated story of love and other demons. So, and there's also like this complication of her family and weirdness, and she's locked away. Again, weirdness. Very complicated story. And then I picked up Until August. So Gabriel Garcia Marquez passed away, I think, quite a while ago, a couple years ago. I don't know for sure. Okay, he was writing drafts in 2004. So he passed quite a few years ago, and this was actually published by his children. And the one thing I was kind of shocked about and maybe felt a bit uncomfortable about is that this book was published without his permission, in the sense. He was not interested in having this book published at all because he felt like it wasn't his best work. After many years, his children decided to publish it, and I questioned, was that really a good idea? And in the end, after I finished this novel, I thought it was, and I think it was, because we got to see this transition of an author who was writing these complicated, detailed, and crazy stories, and we have this novel which represents his last story he wrote. And when you read this, it's not complicated, it's not convoluted, it's not crazy, it's not it's not something that you're going to have to try to comprehend at the end. And the story's still heavy. And what kind of shocked me when I was reading this is when you read kind of the introduction and then also about the story, you find out that Gabriel Garcia Marquez was writing the story over many years, and he was also suffering from dementia, and he was having a hard time being able to articulate the things that he wanted to articulate. And when you read this, it's not you read it and you're like, oh yeah, I could see that. It's more you read it and you still are shocked by how beautiful he can write, or he wrote. And this story ends up following a youngish woman. I think she's in her 40s, so I would say youngish. And she ends up going to an island to celebrate her mother's life. So her mother had passed, and now her mother is buried on this island, and she goes to this island every year to celebrate her mother's life by leaving her carnations. I believe they're carnations. I can't remember for specific. I can't remember specifically, but she leaves flowers on her grave. And this woman ends up meeting a man. And we follow her journey through this interaction with this man and the outcome of afterwards. And then also how she deals with these feelings and thoughts and struggles. And I don't want to go too much into detail about what the book is about because it's not very long. It's a very quick read. I read it in a day, and it's about love and grief and struggle and trying to figure out what is right. So I think you should read it. I also just really like this author. I think he, like I said, he wrote beautiful stories. Love and Other Demons was not my favorite novel, but I still think about it. I still think it's weird. And I really loved how this one turned out as well. This one got a 4-star from me, I believe. Yeah, so Until August got a 4-star, and I really, really did enjoy it. And I'm looking forward to reading other books by this author as well. I have 3 more books. You got this. So the next book is Table for Two by Omar Towles. This is a short story collection. I loved almost all the stories in this book. So I really enjoyed all of the stories except for the last one. So the last one takes place in Los Angeles, and it's also his longest story. So there were 6 other stories, 6 other short stories, and I really liked them all. I thought they were so well done. The stories are intriguing and full of love and pain. I have a lot of books about pain, I know, but there's also a lot of love, and I find it always really fascinating to read about other people's love and also grief and pain. And this one was just packed full of so many different stories. There's specifically one story in here that I still think about, and it is about a man who accidentally runs into this very charismatic, intriguing, and cool dude, and then ends up having one of the most difficult nights he has ever had. And so I really liked this. I do love a collection of short stories, and I thought the first 6 were great. The last one was just a bit long for me as a short story. It was more of a novella, and I kind of lost interest through half the story. But the beginning of the story and the end of the story was really great. The middle part was where I was just like, I don't know if I can get into this. So there are 7 stories in total, and they're all really intriguing. This did get a 4-star from me because it was just the last story that just didn't hit it for me as a home run. The other ones were all 5-star. It was just that last one. So I really enjoyed it. If you like a collection of short stories, I think you should pick this one up as well and enjoy it. And there's not much more for me to tell you about it because as a book of short stories, you have multiple different kind of directions, but do know that it is about love, it is about grief, it is about coming to terms with certain things, powering through, and the interaction between characters and people. And that's one thing I forgot to mention. There is kind of a lot of discovery behind how people interact with each other, which I think is also really cool. The way we speak with each other and find friendships and find lovers as well. So Table for Two by Omar Towles, also a delightful book. Two more. And these two probably are my lowest rated of my 12 books of 2024. And I didn't do that on purpose, it just happened to be that way. So the next book I'm going to talk about is Real Americans by Rachel Kwong. I really loved the first half of this book. I thought the first half of this book was so fascinating. We follow this young woman who is discovering the story of how her parents came from China to the US and how they escaped this hard world of pain and suffering. And this was such an intriguing story to me because it's a story that I haven't heard before. I do know a lot of people were escaping countries to find new beginnings, and it was really great to kind of hear about the story of how this woman's mother escaped this very treacherous and painful situation, ended up finding her life in the US and continuing to integrate into the US culture. What I also found really fascinating is her mother was very, very intent, also the father, was very intent in making sure that she was American, that she was a true American, meaning that she learned American culture, that she integrated in society, that she spoke English fluently, that she didn't learn Chinese, that she didn't learn her mother's past or her father's past, that she was integrated and a true American. And I found that really interesting because I remember talking to some kids when I was growing up, or some students in my university, where they were also told they were meant to integrate fully and completely into American society. And I never thought about it as like maybe a negative or a positive. I just was like, oh, okay. But I do now think there are negatives and positives to that, because there is a part of you where, like, for example, when I was talking about Tommy Orange, Wandering Stars, and wanting to understand my Native American heritage more, and there are probably a lot of people, a lot of young people who were told, hey, we're no longer part of this culture, you're now learning completely from this culture, and now they're intrigued by their past kind of families' lives and wanting to understand the other culture that their families came from. So I do find that really fascinating and interesting, and I understand why parents want to integrate their children into a society where they're going to grow up and be part of, though. However, I do think there's positive and negatives, like I said. There's a lot that I could make this a whole discussion just about that idea, but I'm talking about the book. So we end up following this young woman who's kind of trying to figure out her parents' story, and actually I think that was in the first half. Actually, I can't remember. So there's one part where there are three parts to this story. Sorry. So one part is the daughter's point of view. The second part is the mother's point of view. The third part is from the son's point of view of the daughter, the son of the daughter from the mother. So I really enjoyed the second part. I thought that was really fascinating. The first part was okay. The third part I didn't like. And it was mostly because I felt like, unfortunately, that we found characters that were very whiny and irritable. And I struggle with characters that are like that. However, maybe that's really how teenagers are. I don't have a teenager in my life, so I don't really know. Actually, I lie. I do have one teenager in my life, and I think they're irritable. So maybe I just don't understand a teenage perspective. And so I do still find this book really fascinating, really beautiful. I do understand the hardships with family and maybe not seeing the same perspective or seeing the same kind of outcome or wanting the same outcome. I think a lot of families struggle with that, unfortunately, where you have just a lot of differing opinions, and that can be a really big struggle. So Real Americans, I do recommend in the sense if that's a story that you may find interesting and if you can deal with teenage frustration. But I did still enjoy it. I still liked it. I believe I still gave it a 3.5, 4-star. I gave it a 3.5 star. So I still did enjoy it. And I think following the daughter's path to how she ended up figuring out who her family was and who her family is was still also very well done. So I recommend it. The last book I don't have here, and that's because I did not like this book. I didn't hate it, I just did not like it. And that was A Book of Love by Kelly Link. I believe I talked about this book in a past video before, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about it real fast. So, The Book of Love is about a couple friends who, I have to try to remember what it's about. I have my notes. This is why I have a bullet journal, so I can always have my notes, because sometimes I just forget, especially when books don't kind of stick in my brain. So, The Book of Love. So my notes read, so first 2024 release that I did not love. This honestly felt so long and so convoluted and messy. I had a hard time connecting with any of the characters. They all, again, fell flat. Daniel had no reason to not want to do magic. Laura was weird and controlling for no reason. Susanna just bland? I have a hard time reading my handwriting. Mo was probably the most interesting, but then just wants to be water at some point. And this honestly could have been good, but it needed more editing. It needed to be shorter or split into different books, and it just needed to get this, and it just needed to get it together. I finished this because I felt that I needed to, but I felt like I could have skipped the last 100 pages or just read what happened, and the rest could have been tossed. Not a book I would pick up again, and honestly not sure I would read another novel from the author. Maybe just some short stories. Wow, I was really negative. So I guess that's how I felt about that book. But I can't tell you, I honestly can't remember very much about the book. I do remember there being a lot of magic. I do remember being a mix of worlds and maybe a god. It was just very complicated for a very heavy book that was also kind of boring. So nothing against Kelly Link. I don't know, again, if I would read another book by the author, but just because I wasn't into this book and I felt like it felt a little flat. So there are so many other books in the world that I would love to read that sometimes if I'm not in love with an author, I don't see a reason to go back to the author. Maybe I just didn't like her writing style. If you did love this book, good. I'm happy you did. The great thing about books, the great thing about anything that we can have an opinion on, like movies, art, anything, music, is we have an ability to connect these things with our own emotions, our own memories, our own thoughts. So we all have different opinions about books. That's why I like discussing them, is because we all get something different out of it. So I truly did like a lot of these books. I loved a lot of them. I'm still looking forward to reading the last 3 on my 12 books of 2024. But I also have a new collection. And I'm not sure if you saw my other video, but if you do want to see it, you can click on this video down below. And this video talks about my new 12 books of 2025 and how they are different. So I'm going to leave it there because this is long enough and I enjoyed talking about each of these books, but sometimes we just need to move on. And I'm moving on from 2024 and I'm jumping into 2025. I've already started. I've already have some great ideas, like I said. So if you have any ideas, if there's anything you want to see in my upcoming videos, let me know in the comments below. I'm always looking for new ideas and I'm going to leave you there. Thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you so much for being part of this channel, this community, this fun space. And I'm still looking forward to continuing to make it fun and exciting, bringing in more books, baking, and other cozy content. And I'll see you guys in the next video in 2 weeks. So until then, have a fantastic day, have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you guys soon. Ciao!